Waking up at 2:14 a.m. to a smart home security notification that reads unrecognized occupant detected in master bed is terrifying. But your soul completely leaves your body when you open the live thermal camera feed and see a distinct, bright red human heat signature lying directly on top of your paralyzed body on the mattress. My name is Vance Caldwell, and in the winter of 2024, I moved into a highly advanced, fully automated smart home nestled in the isolated hills of Austin, Texas. The house was a minimalist masterpiece of concrete and glass, completely managed by an artificial intelligence system called Aegis that controlled everything from the biometric door locks and automated blinds to the high-end thermal security grid. Because the property was situated on a remote, unlit 5-acre lot surrounded by dense cedar woods, I spared no expense on security. The house was designed to be an impenetrable fortress of modern luxury. But I quickly learned that when a home is completely connected to a digital network, isolation doesn't keep the world out. It locks you inside with whatever is already there. It was a freezing Tuesday night when the system began to malfunction in a deeply unsettling way. I was sound asleep when the modern smart speaker on my nightstand activated itself with a loud digital pop. The calm, automated female voice of Aegis echoed through the pitch-black bedroom, but her tone was glitched and slightly lowered in pitch. System alert. Thermal grid recalibrating. Internal temperature dropping. I groaned, rubbing my eyes, and noticed that my breath was forming a thick, white cloud in the air. The digital thermostat on the wall was rapidly spinning downward, dropping from 72 degrees to a freezing 34 degrees within seconds. I reached for my smartphone to manually override the climate control, but before my fingers could touch the screen, a high-priority security push notification vibrated across the display. It was an automated alert from the bedroom's ceiling-mounted thermal camera. It read, "Unrecognized occupant detected in master bed." My heart skipped a violent beat. I froze, holding my breath, my eyes darting around the dark room. The floorboards were completely silent. The bedroom door was locked tight with a heavy biometric bolt. I unlocked my phone and tapped on the live security feed. The screen displayed a high-definition thermal map of my bedroom, where heat was represented by bright reds and yellows, and the cold room was deep blue. On the screen, I could see my own yellow silhouette lying on the left side of the bed, but lying directly on the right side, completely overlapping my form, was a massive, pitch-red human heat signature. It was shaped like a violently elongated human body, its limbs unnaturally thin, leaning over my sleeping form. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over me. I slowly turned my head to look at the empty space on the mattress beside me. There was absolutely nothing there. The sheets were empty. The air was clear. Shaking with fear, I looked back down at the live phone screen. On the thermal feed, the bright red entity was now moving. The heat map showed its elongated limbs slowly crawling across the mattress, sliding directly onto my chest. At that exact microsecond, an immense, suffocating physical weight slammed down onto my body. My lungs collapsed under the pressure, and I let out a choked gasp. It felt like a solid block of invisible ice was pressing down on my ribs, pinning my arms to my sides. I couldn't move a single muscle. I was completely paralyzed in my own bed. The invisible pressure was so intense, I could hear the wooden frame of the mattress creaking under the weight of something massive. Through the absolute silence of the room, the smart speaker on the nightstand burst to life again. But the automated voice was now entirely corrupted, layered with a heavy, wet mechanical static that sounded like a chorus of drowning people. Occupant registration failed, purging unauthorized life form. Suddenly, the automated motorized blinds across the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows began to slam shut and open violently, creating a deafening mechanical clatter that echoed through the empty house. The smart lights throughout the hallway began to strobe in a blinding, rhythmic sequence, casting long, frantic shadows across my bedroom walls. I fought against the invisible paralysis, pouring every ounce of adrenaline into my right hand until my fingers finally twitched. I lunged sideways, tumbling off the bed and crashing onto the hard concrete floor. The moment I broke contact with the mattress, the suffocating weight vanished from my chest, and I gasped for air, my lungs burning. I didn't look back at the bed. I scrambled toward the bedroom door, grabbing the modern metal handle. But as I pulled, the heavy biometric lock clicked shut from the outside. The digital screen on the door handle flashed red, displaying a glitched message: lockdown active. Quarantine protocol. The AI system had locked me inside my own room. I turned around, my back pressed against the locked door, as the phone on the floor continued to broadcast the live thermal feed. The bright red entity on the screen was now sliding off the bed, its elongated silhouette moving across the digital map directly toward the door where I was standing. The thermal camera didn't lie. Something supernatural was moving through the physical space of the room, completely invisible to the human eye, but radiating a terrifying, unnatural heat signature. The temperature in the room plummeted further, and frost began to rapidly spiderweb across the concrete walls. In a state of pure, primal hysteria, I grabbed a heavy iron sculpture from the dresser and threw it with all my might at the massive glass window facing the woods. The glass shattered with a catastrophic boom, raining silver shards down onto the frozen grass outside. I didn't hesitate. I dove through the broken frame, ignoring the sharp glass that tore through my clothes and skin, and tumbled onto the dirt lot below. I ran blindly through the pitch-black cedar woods of my bare feet, not stopping until I reached the highway a mile away, where a passing motorist found me shivering and covered in blood. When the local police inspected the automated house the next morning, they found the property entirely functioning normally. The locks were open, the temperature was a comfortable 72 degrees, and there was no structural damage besides the shattered window. However, when the tech team extracted the internal data logs from the security server, they discovered that the thermal camera had recorded a permanent, physical heat signature of 115 degrees permanently burned into the hardwood floorboards directly beneath the master bed, a shape resembling a massive, three-toed footprint that had melted the synthetic finish. I sold the smart home at a massive loss within a week, leaving everything I own behind. I live in a simple, traditional cabin now, with manual locks and no internet. I never use automated technology anymore, and whenever my phone vibrates with a random security notification at night, my chest locks up with an absolute, suffocating dread because I know that out there in the digital grid, something invisible is always looking for a place to occupy. Sitting alone inside an isolated fire lookout tower suspended 80 feet above a dense, pitch-black national forest at 3 a.m. is a masterclass in psychological tension. But your blood turns to absolute ice when the official emergency radio channel broadcasts a live recording of your own voice screaming for help from the woods directly below your stairs. My name is Sterling Hayes, and in the summer of 2025, I accepted an overnight position as a fire lookout ranger at the Whispering Ridge Station, deep within the rugged interior of the Mount Hood National Forest in Oregon. The tower was an isolated wooden cabin perched atop a massive steel scaffolding structure, offering a 3-100-60-degree view of miles of unbroken timber and jagged mountain peaks. My responsibilities were straightforward: monitor the horizon for smoke during the dry season, log weather patterns, and maintain communication with the central base station 30 miles away via a high-powered analog radio console. There was no cellular reception, no electricity besides a loud diesel generator on the ground, and the absolute silence of the wilderness at night was so profound it felt like a physical entity watching me through the dark windows. It was exactly 3:12 a.m. on an unseasonably cold Thursday when the silence was shattered by a sharp burst of static from the heavy desktop radio receiver. The signal meter needle violently slammed into the red zone, vibrating against the glass housing. I leaned over the console, assuming it was a routine check from a neighboring station. But as the white noise cleared, a voice broke through the speaker that made my hands instantly begin to tremble. It was a man sobbing hysterically, coughing through what sounded like thick smoke, his voice carrying a level of raw, agonizing terror. As he spoke, A cold sweat broke out across my neck. The voice was mine. The exact pitch, the specific inflection, the way I muttered when I was panicked. It was in flawless, acoustic duplicate of my own vocal cords. The stairs are gone. The radio voice wept, accompanied by a heavy, metallic distortion and the sound of wood splintering. Something is climbing the steel structure. It's mimicking the wind. It's 3:15 a.m., and the lock on the trapdoor just snapped. It's looking directly at me. Please, anyone, answer. The transmission was abruptly cut off by a horrific, wet tearing sound, followed by a guttural, multi-layered screech that didn't belong to any animal on Earth. The radio then returned to a dead, hollow hiss. A wave of pure, paralyzing adrenaline flooded my veins. I looked down at the digital watch on my wrist. The display read 3:13 a.m. I had exactly 2 minutes before the events detailing my own death were scheduled to occur on the timeline. I grabbed the heavy handheld microphone, my knuckles turning white. Base station, this is Whispering Ridge, do you copy? Someone is hijacking my frequency. Please respond. I screamed into the receiver, but the speaker remained dead, completely choked by an unnatural, heavy static. Suddenly, the loud, rhythmic thrumming of the diesel generator on the ground below completely cut out. The comforting mechanical vibration of the tower vanished, replaced by an absolute, suffocating silence. The bright fluorescent overhead lights died instantly, plunging the small wooden cabin into absolute darkness. The only light came from the faint green glow of the battery-powered radio console. The temperature inside the lookout tower plummeted with an impossible speed. Within seconds, frost began to rapidly bloom across the glass windows, thick and white, completely blocking my view of the forest outside. Through the frozen glass, I heard a sound that made my muscles completely lock up. Creak, creak, creak. It was the distinct, heavy sound of footsteps slowly ascending the external steel steps of the tower. They were moving with a bizarre, uneven rhythm, 2 quick steps followed by a long, heavy drag, as if whatever was climbing was struggling to adapt to a physical body. I stood in the center of the dark cabin, clutching a heavy iron emergency crowbar to my chest, my eyes locked on the thick wooden trapdoor set into the floor. The footsteps reached the final landing directly outside the door. Then, the heavy metal handle began to shake. Someone was testing the lock from the outside. I backed away until my spine hit the frozen glass window behind me. Then, the voice came through the wooden panels of the trapdoor. It was soft, comforting, and perfectly replicated my own voice, but it sounded slightly hollow, like an echo inside an empty cave. Sterling, open up. It's cold out here. The generator broke down. My jaw dropped, and a tear of pure horror slid down my cheek. I hadn't spoken a single word out loud since the generator died. Whatever was standing on that platform had extracted my voice directly from the radio frequency and was now using it like a weapon. When I didn't answer, the voice changed. It repeated the exact same phrase, word for word, with the exact same rise and fall in pitch, but it began to layer upon itself, shifting into the voices of old missing hikers whose names I'd seen in the station logbook from years ago. A chorus of dead voices was begging to be let inside. The digital watch on my wrist beeped softly. 3:15 a.m. At that exact second, the heavy steel latch on the trapdoor violently snapped. The thick wood split down the center with a deafening boom. The trapdoor swung open, banging against the floorboards, revealing the pitch-black void of the staircase shaft below. No human figure climbed out of the hole. Instead, a dense, shifting mass of shadow, blacker than the surrounding night, began to pour over the threshold like liquid oil. The air became so foul it smelled heavily of rotten wet earth and stagnant swamp water. The shadow mass didn't have a face, but within its fluid architecture, dozens of glowing, translucent white eyes began to open, all of them focused entirely on my position. Primal survival instinct overrode my paralysis. I didn't try to fight the entity with the crowbar. I turned around, raised a heavy iron bar, and smashed it through the rear glass window of the cabin. I threw myself out onto the narrow emergency catwalk that ringed the exterior of the tower, 80 feet in the air. The freezing mountain wind lashed against my face as I grabbed the cold steel ladder on the opposite side of the structure, sliding down the vertical rungs so fast the metal burned through my palms. I hit the gravel ground below and bolted into the dark forest, running blindly through the briars and jagged rocks, ignoring the branches that tore at my clothes. Behind me, from the top of the tower, the station's high-powered emergency siren suddenly activated itself without electricity, broadcasting a deafening, mechanical wail across the entire mountain ridge, layered with that same weeping, duplicated voice of mine, screaming into the void. I spent the remaining hours of the night hidden inside the hollow trunk of an ancient redwood tree, clutching the crowbar, praying for the sun to rise. When the relief ranger arrived at 8 a.m., he found me half-frozen and unresponsive in the brush. The subsequent investigation by the forestry department revealed that the interior of the fire tower was completely gutted. Not by fire, but all the wooden surfaces, the radio equipment, and the logbooks had been completely dissolved by a strange, acidic black residue. Burned into the center of the steel trapdoor were two massive, deeply etched words: "Signal received." I resigned that very morning, leaving the forestry service forever. I live in a crowded city now, surrounded by constant noise. I never go near the woods, and whenever I hear a radio glitch or a burst of unexpected static on a clean device, my blood runs completely cold because I know that out there in the quiet places of the wilderness, something supernatural is always scanning the frequencies, waiting to broadcast your final moments to the world. Monitoring a closed, bricked-off subterranean subway terminal beneath a historic city at 3 a.m. is a lonely security shift. But your lungs completely seize when a vintage 1970s transit train glides onto the empty tracks on your monitor, filled with silent silhouettes who slowly turn their heads to stare directly into the security camera lens. My name is Roman Pierce, and in the winter of 2024, I accepted a high-paying night security position for the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority in Boston. My assignment was Terminal 4, a deep subterranean station that had been completely closed to the public since 1982 due to fatal structural collapses and unexplained atmospheric anomalies. The station was located 3 levels below the active transit lines, accessible only by a long, winding concrete staircase and a heavy iron security door. My workstation was a small, reinforced concrete security booth equipped with a bank of ancient black and white monitors that broadcasted grainy feeds from the dusty, tiled platforms below. The air down there was perpetually damp, smelling of old iron rust, stagnant water, and ancient concrete dust that hung heavily in the dim light. It was exactly 3:15 a.m. during a blinding blizzard above ground when the first supernatural manifestation occurred on the monitors. I was sipping stale coffee, staring at camera 3, which overlooked the abandoned inbound track, when the screen suddenly erupted into violent static. The heavy analog monitors began to buzz loudly, the glass screens vibrating against their plastic housings. A second later, the static cleared, and a low, rhythmic mechanical rumbling began to echo through the solid concrete floors of the booth. It was a sound that shouldn't have existed. The electricity to the third-level tracks had been physically disconnected 40 years ago. I watched in absolute, cold paralysis as a vintage 1970s subway car slowly glided into the station view on camera 3. The train was pristine, completely free of the rust and graffiti that covered the rest of the abandoned terminal. The interior lights of the train cars were glowing with a pale, sickly green hue. But what made my heart violently slam against my ribs was the passengers. Every single window of the train was crowded with dark, motionless silhouettes of people dressed in outdated, mid-century clothing. As the train came to a smooth halt on the rusted tracks, every single passenger inside the cars slowly, synchronously turned their heads 90 degrees to look directly into the camera lens. They had no eyes. Where their faces should have been, there were only empty, swirling voids of black static that mirrored the monitor screens. Before I could scream, The heavy iron security door of my guard booth mechanically slammed shut from the outside with a deafening metallic thud. The manual deadbolt turned on its own, locking me inside the concrete enclosure. A second later, the main power grid to the booth died, plunging my immediate space into absolute darkness, leaving only the harsh, flickering green glare of the security monitors illuminating the room. Through the heavy concrete walls, a sound began to echo up the abandoned staircase from the track below. Squish, squish, squish. It was the sound of dozens of wet, heavy footsteps slowly ascending the concrete steps in perfect, terrifying unison. The passengers had exited the train and were moving up toward the security level. Shaking with fear, I looked down at Monitor 2, which covered the intermediate hallway. The screen displayed the empty, tiled corridor under flickering fluorescent bulbs. As the wet footsteps grew louder, the black voids on the monitor screens began to expand, creeping outward from the passenger silhouettes like a digital infection. Suddenly, the old analog intercom speaker mounted on the wall of my booth burst to life with a blast of deafening white noise. Through the screeching audio static, a chorus of multi-layered voices, men, women, and children, began to speak in a flat, monotone cadence that vibrated through my skull. Next stop, Terminal 0. Please step behind the yellow line. Your seat is waiting. The audio distortion was so intense that my ears began to bleed, a warm trickle of crimson sliding down my neck. I fought against the absolute panic, grabbing a heavy-duty iron flashlight from the desk, and began to desperately batter the reinforced glass window of the security booth. The glass didn't shatter. It was bulletproof, designed to withstand riots, trapping me inside the concrete coffin. The wet footsteps stopped directly outside the iron security door. Then, the heavy metal door began to buckle inward. The solid iron panel was warping as if an immense, supernatural hydraulic pressure was pushing against it from the hallway. The industrial rivets began to pop out one by one, shooting across the booth like bullets. Through the widening gaps in the metal frame, a thick, freezing black mist began to pour into the booth, carrying with it the sickening smell of wet copper and old decay. Through the broken seam of the door, I didn't see human faces. I saw an endless sea of pale, elongated limbs and hollow, featureless heads shifting through the black vapor. The chorus of voices erupted again, now pressing directly against the cracked door. The train is leaving, Roman. Do not miss the final transit. The entities knew my name. They were extracting my data directly from the security logbook sitting on a desk. In a moment of pure, primal impulse, I looked behind me and noticed the small wall-mounted ventilation shaft that led to the utility tunnels of the active second-level tracks. I ripped the rusted metal grate off the wall with my bare hands, ignoring the sharp iron that sliced through my fingers and squeezed my upper body into the narrow, dark concrete duct. I crawled through the dust and tight space with a frantic, animalistic speed, scraping my chest against the stone as a violent crash behind me signaled that the iron security door of the booth had finally given way. The freezing black mist surged into the vent behind me, nipping at my boots like cold teeth. I crawled for what felt like miles until I finally burst through an access hatch onto the active tracks of Level 2, where a maintenance crew found me unconscious and babbling incoherently at 5 a.m. When the transit authority officials conducted a full inspection of Terminal 4 later that week, they found the security booth completely destroyed. The iron door had been ripped off its hinges, and the interior was covered in a deep layer of fine, black magnetic dust. However, when they checked the internal camera drives, the data from that night was completely wiped, replaced by a single, permanent audio file of dead static. I still don't know if I truly escaped that station. What would you have done if you saw that train pull in? Tell me in the comments. I handed in my security badge that very afternoon, refusing to ever step foot in an underground transit system again. I travel only by car now, and whenever I pass a subway grates on a quiet city street and hear that low, rhythmic mechanical rumbling from the darkness below, my chest tightens with an absolute, suffocating dread because I know that down there in the forgotten tunnels beneath the earth, the static train is always waiting for its final passenger.